is one of the early sources that refers to Swarnadvipa, to Sumatra, and it attests to the fact that there was wide maritime trade happening from the western coast that stretches from Gujarat to Kerala and the southeast. So the fact that there was trade happening between Malaysia and Indochina and the Indian coast, and many of the details, the description of place names, the descriptions of the ships that Haribhadrasüri gives us are quite realistic. They are not filled with poetic fancy. So in a way, there is also this valuable economic history or cultural history information that can be found from the Samurai Chakaha. But more importantly, coming back to our text, the Dhūrtākhyāna, let me tell you a bit about the text. So the story is set in Ujjaina, the frame story. And what is happening is that in a park on the outskirts of Avanti or Ujjaina, there are these 5 groups, 5 parties of Dhūrtas. Now, who is a Dhūrta? The word Dhūrta is a insult, means a thief or a cheat or a scoundrel. And here you have the gathering of a very large gathering. One could say it is a seminar or a conference of these professional Dhūrtas, of professional thieves. And there are 5 groups of 500 of these scoundrels each, and each group is headed by one leader, one Mahamahopadhyaya of being a cheat. And the first of these is Mooladeva. Now, Mooladeva is a legendary figure. He existed both before and after Haribhadrasüri. I'll come to him in a moment. He's also referred to as Moolasiri or Moolashri in this text. Moolashri, Elashadha, Kandarika, Shasha, and then there is one woman, because it's not just men who can be experts at cheating. There's also one lady, Khandapana, and she is a leader of each of these 5 people. They're leading a camp of 500 other cheats or scoundrels, and Khandapana's team is full of other expert cheats, and all of them are women. And the other 4, of course, they have only men in their camps. And all of these people have gathered in a park outside Ujjaini. When have they gathered? It's in the monsoon season. So they have gathered to conduct this kind of conference and discuss techniques of cheating and lying, and to exchange techniques. So it is obviously a reference. They've gathered in the rainy season. So it's a reference, presumably, to these Buddhist conferences that used to happen in the monsoon season. So they used to have what is called the Varshavasa conferences, when they all congregated to discuss the Siddhanta, the doctrine, and this must be a satire of that. And the Varshavasa continues not just in the Bauddha and the Jaina traditions, but also in the Brahmanical Smarta tradition, in the form of the Chaturmasya. So the Chaturmasya practice of the Brahmanical sannyasins is a continuation of the Varshavasa, where during the monsoon they don't travel, they gather in one place and then either discuss Siddhanta amongst other monks, or they conduct lectures of Siddhanta to lay followers. In the Jaina tradition, they would be called Shravakas. Now, as both those of you who have attended conferences and those of you who conducted conference know, it's a big logistical nightmare it's a great expense and effort to coordinate all the people and to feed. Now here you have 1,500 people gathered, or no, how many is it? 2,500 people gathered. So the responsibility of feeding the whole gathering is usually borne turn by turn by one of these 5 chiefs or leaders. So one day they had to decide who will arrange the meal for that day. And then these 5 scoundrels decided that they will each tell some fantastic tales, some tall tales, unbelievable tales. And if any of the others does not find it believable, that means if they're not able to offer a defense of this story's credibility based on evidence, pramanas, from the authoritative texts, from the itihasas or the Puranas, or even the Vedic narrative texts like the Brahmana literature, then whoever this disbeliever is, they had to pay the price for their lack of faith, for not believing the story, by sponsoring the lunch. And sponsoring lunch for whom? For all the 2,500 gathered Dhūrtas. So it begins with Mulashri. He narrates some fantastic story. And then, so surely you people can't believe the story, isn't it? And then one of the others offers, like a Shastra Pandita, he offers a samadhana. He offers an explanation for why this fantastic story, it is not very fantastic, it is very believable. If that can happen in that Purana, if that other thing can happen in the Itihasa, then your story is also very likely. Of course, you are a very honest man. So they escape by constructing these very clever explanations or samadhanas for the fantastic story. They escape the responsibility of having to pay for the food. So each of the others is able to justify the plausibility of this tale by giving similar elements from the epics or the Puranas. Let me give you a sample, and I'll give you the first story, the story that is narrated, the first story narrated by Muladeva. And there is a reason, because this Mulashri or Muladeva is a legendary figure. He is this picaresque figure that features, he's traveled not just all over India, he's also traveled in and out of texts. One can say he's a Mahamahopadhyaya of thieves and scoundrels. I think the first time we see him is in the Brihat Katha, and so in the retellings of the Brihat Katha, like Kshemendra's Brihat Katha Manjari, he features. Muladeva also appears in the Vetala Panchavimshati. In the Dashakumara Charita, one of the princes says that I went and learned this matter from the king, from the expert of Steya Shastra, of the Shastra of stealing, of thievery, that is Muladeva. And he's a big figure in Kshemendra's Kalavilasa, where he teaches this young man all about cheating, and then tells him, learn these things not so that you turn into a cheat, but so that you're not fooled by other cheats. So Muladeva is this prominent figure. Long ago, the linguist Bloomfield wrote an article about this kind of long career of Muladeva across many texts. He's also named in the text of Kama Shastra sometimes as an authority in Kama Shastra. So the Dhūrtākhyāna begins with one of Muladeva's story. Let me tell you some of his story. The text is mostly set in Prakrit Gahas, and then there is an early chaya of it from the 13th century, written by another Shvetambara, Jaina. And then there are many simpler glosses of the Dhūrtākhyāna in Old Gujarati and in Apabhramsha and in Hindi. So it must have been a very popular text, at least to some degree, among scholars. So the first story that Muladeva tells, I'll tell you the story. So he says, let me tell you about something that happened to me when I was a young man. I wanted to become rich. So I decided to go to Kailasa and receive the Ganga on my head. So I was traveling with a water pot, a kamandala and an umbrella, and a rutting elephant, a Madagaja, attacked me. It started running behind me. I was very afraid, and I couldn't find a place to hide. So I jumped into the kamandala so that I could save my life. The elephant was very angry, and it followed me inside the kamandala, where I kept escaping and playing hide and seek with the elephant for at least 6 months. And then after these 6 months, finally, through the spout, is it called kindi in Malayalam? Through the spout of the kamandala, I escaped, and the elephant started to follow me through this spout, but then its tail got stuck in the spout, so I was saved. Finally, I approached the Ganga, which was like an ocean, the Ganga Sagara, and then I crossed this Ganga Sagara and reached the house of Shiva. I reached Kailasa, and there I did tapas. I waited hungry and thirsty, and then I received the dhara, the stream of Ganga, on my head for 6 continuous months. After that, I came to Jaini, and I'm meeting all of you. If you accept that what I'm saying is true, then prove that it is true by giving pramanas. And if you say that it is a lie, then please arrange for a feast, arrange for a sadhya. So now all of us would think that it's very difficult to prove this story as being realistic. But then the second Dhūrtākhyāna, Kandarika, he says, yes, anyone who has read the Ramayana, Mahabharata, Puranas cannot call the story a lie. We have heard so many episodes there. So there, if all the four varnas, all the people of the world, the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, and so on, were born from the body of the Purusha, then it means the entire population of the world can be accommodated inside a person's body. So then surely you can also accommodate the Ganga in your head. So if it is possible that Hanuman can cross the ocean just by the strength of his arms, then you can cross the Ganga just like that. And if Shiva could receive Ganga for the benefit of the world from the Swarganga, from the heaven, and he received her water apparently for thousands of years, then you can also receive the stream of the Ganga for 6 months. So all the stories you're saying are true. You're a Sajjana and you have Viveka. None of these stories that you're saying can be false. Now this is just to give you a flavor, the kind of story you find in the Dhūrtākhyāna. Now we can ask a question. It is very sarcastic, it is very satirical. It is poking fun of the stories that are found in the Puranas. But then what is the purpose? He's not a joker, Haribhadrasüri. He's a Pandit. What is the reason for him to craft these absurd tales, and not just to construct these tales, but then offering these absurd explanations for it based on the Brahmanical Puranas? So for that we have to reflect a bit about the Jaina doctrine. So one of the cardinal principles of the Jaina doctrine is true knowledge, samyaktva or samyak jnana. And the opposite of this samyak jnana is mithya jnana or mithyatva, that is false knowledge or some kind of misleading knowledge, something that is untrue. And the purpose of most of the Jaina doctrine is to kind of convince people about the value of the samyak jnana and how therefore that is the true darshana or the true siddhanta, and therefore they should follow this kind of rational or a logical siddhanta and not follow all these mithya jnanas. And keeping this in mind, these akhyana stories have been constructed so as to present this kind of polemical argument in the disguise of reason. So if you're an intelligent, rational person, if you're a samyak jnani, or even if you're potentially an intelligent audience, the absurdity of these Puranic tales and thereby their falsity, their mithyatva, should be transparent. And what they should lead to is a change of heart. So without them writing texts where they explicitly tell you that all these gods are fake and all their stories are irrational, they present it to you in a way that seems to be very logical, and the expectation is that if you're an intelligent person, if you have viveka, then you will see that one set of stories are full of mithya siddhanta, and then you should move over to the true path, which is the Jaina siddhanta. But this whole exercise in the hands of Haribhadrasüri is conducted with a certain flair. Now he could have spoiled the story at the end of these 5 narrators, each giving lists of fantastic stories, and then the others defending those stories. He could have chosen to put a Jaina monk who then comes and gives you a long discourse about how therefore the Jaina Siddhanta is the best because it doesn't have any such fantastical legendary stories. But Haribhadra very wisely, he avoids this tendency. And he just finishes the story with Khandapana. By the way, the woman teacher of the scoundrels, Khandapana, hers is the last in the 5 set of stories, and she's the one who wins. And so they are unable to prove her false. They are unable to demonstrate that what she's saying is true. And then she's the winner, and all the other 4 men have to pay for the meal. But there is a kind of long shadow of Haribhadrasüri, in that this tendency to construct these cheeky, tongue-in-cheek stories which attack the logic that you find in the Puranic narratives is very big. There are many texts that were written in this style. So one of them would be Amita Gati's Dharma Pariksha. And the Dharma Pariksha is like the Megha Sandesha or the Gita Govinda. It was such a popular text that it became a very genre. You find dozens of texts in Sanskrit, Prakrit, Apabhramshas, Kannada, and so on, with the same name, called Dharma Pariksha, which follow this same structure. They all take up seemingly absurd or incoherent events in the Puranas and challenge them, or say that if this is possible, then some other even more absurd thing is possible. We see a similar tendency in Kshemendra, where he doesn't ridicule the Hindu Dharma, of course, but he points out to all these funny goings on in the lives of the gods and in the Puranas, in the Kala Vilasa and Charucharya. But within the Jaina tradition, there are many more such epigones, such imitations of Haribhadrasüri, some of whom change the style a bit. One example is Arhadasa's Bhavyajana Kanthabharana, which is again meant to be a text that is to reaffirm the superiority of the Jaina Dharma for the believers, and on the other hand, to kind of convince intelligent non-Jainas that this is a superior doctrine, that there is samyaktva in this doctrine and that they should move over here. And if you think about it, this same polemical technique continued right down to the modern era. So the reformer Jyotiba Phule in Maharashtra, he often liked to write about the absurdity of certain events in the Puranas, and then challenge, therefore, the lack of logicality in the Hindu Dharma. And it was the same thing was practiced. Either Jyoti Phule got it from the missionaries, or the missionaries knew about Jyotiba Phule's work. The Christian missionaries often use this as a technique to point out what is problematic or what is seemingly irrational. And somehow the claim is that as if their doctrine and their narrative literature has no fantastic elements, has no superhuman or miraculous elements, and is very rational or very scientific. Whereas if you look at the Puranas and the Itihasas, they have these funny things. Some deity turns into a deer, and then they get stuck somewhere, and then they're able to hold water on their head, and so on. And all of this is presented as being absurd. So I'd like to read one more little story from the end of the text. We started with the beginning of the text. I would like to tell you a story that Khandapana narrates and demonstrate how this is not merely about the fight between Siddhantas. It is about being able to take Puranic narratives lightly. Not always taking it seriously, but being able to look at it in a humorous way. And you'd be surprised when I point you to a parallel of this narrative written in your own Kerala and written by a very devout Shrotriya scholar. So this story is one of the second story that the lady Khandapana narrates. It's in the second book. It goes like this. It's a short story, so I'll read it out for you so that you also get a flavor of the Prakrit text. Khanda bhanai puno me jalano agarisiyo suravaranam jovayanam tenavi me putto jao juyumahanto dhuratho dahai ravi aggi angehi bharisiyo kahatena na daddhaham jalanena samagaya santi. So the question that Khandapana is posing, Khanda bhanai puno me jalano agarisiyo suravaranam jo vayanam. So Khanda bhanati, Khanda says, punaha me jvalano akrishto. So I attracted or I seduced the fire, Agni. What kind of person is he? Suravaranam jo vayanam. Suravaranam yah vadanam. He is the face of the gods, because the gods receive the havis through Agni. Tena vime putto jao jui mahanto. So tena api me putraha jataha dhyuti mahan. And out of this Agni, I bore a son. After we had intercourse, I had a brilliant son. He was Dhyuti mahan. Dhūrtākhyāna dahai ravi aggi angehi bharisiyo dahai. Kahatena na dadhaham jalalena samagaya santi. So Dhūrastho dahati ravi, the sun burns even though he is so far away. Aggi angehi bharisiyo dahai. Agni angaihi sprishto dahati, whereas fire burns when you touch it with your limbs. Kahatena na dadhaham. Then how is it that I was not burnt by him? I came so close to him, we had intercourse. Jwalalena samagata sati. Though I was the most intimate with fire, but how is it that I was not burnt by him? And an answer is given by Elashada. He says, no, your story is quite plausible. These things, they happen. It's not so surprising. And the Elashada's response is that the wife of Yama, Dhūmorna, she was enjoyed by Agni, but then her husband Yama started coming there. So to hide him, she couldn't find a place to hide him, and Dhūmorna swallowed Agni. And then Yama meanwhile came and he swallowed his wife Dhūmorna, and he went to the Devasabha. And there the Devasabha, because the gods are Sarvajñas, they welcomed Yama by saying, "Oh, Tatra Bhavan, you are the third person, you are welcome." And then Yama was embarrassed because he was hiding his wife inside his stomach, and he knew about himself and his wife, but he doesn't know who the third person is. So embarrassed that he brought his wife to the assembly, he vomited her out. But then she too vomited Agni out, and he ran into the forest. And all of these, the whole story is now out in the open, and she is running behind her lover Agni, and Yama is running behind her, and so on. And then Elashada says, so if Yama's wife was not burnt, both by having Agni outside her and inside her, then you also cannot be burnt. It is quite plausible. Now, we're not able to trace exactly where the story is from. I suspect that some version of the story is found in the Shatapatha Brahmana or one of the other Brahmanas, and there is some clue to a similar story concerning Agni and Soma in the Brihadevata, but there is no exact match. But what for me is very interesting is that we find a short text of Narayana Bhattatiri called the Swaha Sudhakara Prabandha, and it is a strikingly similar story to this one. So in that story, Agni is not the one who is cheating someone else. Agni is the one who is being cuckolded. So Agni's wife Swaha, she takes the moon, Chandra, as a lover, and the rest of the story is similar. She has an affair with him in the Agni Griha of Chandra's house, and then once when Chandra is coming there, she hides him, she swallows him, and then Agni meanwhile he swallows Swaha, and then they all go to the Devasabha. He goes to the Devasabha where he's caught that he's hiding his wife inside him, and so on. And it's quite remarkable that we are able to draw almost, they are separated by 800, 900 years, we're able to draw this connection between a narrative in Haribhadra's Dhūrtākhyāna, which itself has an older source. It's possible that Jinadasasuri's Nishithachurni already had some of these, 4 of these 5 stories that are found in the Dhūrtākhyāna. It names the Dhūrtākhyāna even in the auto commentary. But it's quite remarkable that Narayana Bhatta took a very similar story, the story of Yama's wife and Agni, and then changed it a bit, or he heard a different version of the story, and he narrated the same story in his Swaha Sudhakara Prabandha. And it really casts this whole genre of stories in a special light, because when Haribhadra or Amitagati or one of these Jaina acharyas are writing such stories, we can say that they are writing it to attack their contemporary rival sects. They were attacking the Brahmanical dharma. But what does it mean when a complex figure like Kshemendra or a totally orthodox and insider to the tradition like Narayana Bhatta writes such a story? And what it tells us is that all of them were interested in a kind of critical reading of the Kavyas, and all of them also saw just the narrative appeal of such stories. If you write a story about an affair between two devatas, it doesn't mean you disrespect the tradition, or it doesn't mean you're an astika or anything like that. It just shows that you have a sense of humor, and you have confidence in your belief that you can poke fun without needing to threaten somebody that I don't know, you will burn their book or you will do worse to them. And perhaps it is also worthwhile to reflect upon this value that we see in these authors, starting from Haribhadra right down to Narayana Bhattatiri. And I think if you are aware of this streak of narrative literature, which kind of is, on the one hand, it is poking fun, it is satirical, but it is not satire. It is not like stand-up comedy. It's not satire for its own sake. And the satire is situated within a very particular context of both philosophical and doctrinal exchanges, because, of course, they were writing sophisticated philosophical texts where they were arguing with the Nyaya texts of the Buddhist Dharma Keerthi and so on. They were writing texts where they were arguing with the Sankhya and with even to some degree with the early forms of Advaitavada. But what do these texts mean to the lay follower, to the Shravaka, to the ordinary Jaina, or to the ordinary listener? They can't make sense of these texts. Whereas when they listen to narratives which are delightful, such as the Dhūrtākhyāna, we cannot know what kind of statistics there are. How many people immediately gave up Hindu Dharma after listening to the story and became Shvetambara Jainas? I don't think this is also the point of Haribhadra. But the fact is to also expect a certain kind of narrative cohesiveness, a narrative. I hesitate to use the word rationality, but they wanted the stories to make sense. And this is almost a quality of a philologist, where like you see in Shastra, that the Shastra should be avyahata. There shouldn't be internal contradictions between one section of a philosophical text and the other. It looks like Haribhadra and the authors of the similar genre, what they were imposing on the narrative text was the same virtue. That also in the Katha and the Akhyana literature, you cannot have contradictions which one part of the text contradicting another, and also texts that somehow contradict a certain intelligence, a certain viveka that doesn't come from the pramanas of disciplines, that doesn't come from the formal philosophical schemes, but rather that comes from the informal pramana, that is common sense, that these stories should appeal to your common sense. And in a way, it looks like they were taking delight and pleasure in these nonsensical elements. Otherwise, one cannot explain how Haribhadra constructed these carefully crafted arguments and curated this kind of stack upon stack of nonsensical elements in the stories. It is not because they were ashamed or they were deriding this nonsense. Rather, they saw it as a genre of literature to relish and to enjoy. So like today we have nonsense prose and nonsense verse, one can take Haribhadra as an early connoisseur as well as curator of a genre of this nonsensical elements in literature that is to be enjoyed. So one could say if it is not a kavya, so we shouldn't subject a text such as this one strictly to an analysis from the principles of Kavya Shastra. But if one were to ask, so what kind of kavya would it be if the Dharma Pariksha or if the Dhūrtākhyāna is a kavya, then what is the dominant mood? What is the sthayi bhava? One would have to say that it is based upon a sthayi bhava of perhaps hasa. And this hasa or hasya is strengthened by using all of these narrative elements. That's about what I had to say about the Dhūrtākhyāna of Haribhadra and its long legacy in the tradition of Indian literature.